that country back up to a reasonable standard of living, we are going to see that being a source of greater problems.
Ahmed, I understand you wanted to go ahead.
I don't know how we are going through this without mentioning Iran. Iran is the head of the snake. They are trying to push vessels. They're trying to push planes to land with military and with people. Let me
stop you for just a moment, just to kind of get people up to speed on what you're talking about. Iran has said that they have a ship with journalists and aid that they would like to get to Yemen. Saudi Arabia has said that's not going to happen without that ship being inspected. So it seems to perhaps further complicate the situation.
So why they don't let the ship get inspected as if it's all humanitarian and it's all, you know, medical aid for the Yemeni people? Iran has a history of instigating the region, has a history on supporting militia like Al-Houthis, like Ali Abdullah Saleh. Basically, they wayward the advancement. The reason to stop this tomorrow and to have the Yemeni people live in a peaceful, living like the Saudis is trying to provide them, is to stop Iran from interfering in the Iranian business and not to Ali Abdurrabbu Mansour that he is the president of Yemen. Iran is a factor of the game. The American Navy ships have stopped a couple ships before. They're trying to get to Yemen. Iran has the biggest instigator on that region, and if the war is going to take longer and longer, that's because of what Iran is trying to.
And again, those are serious allegations. Those are serious allegations that you're making that this will be extended because of Iran. We don't have anyone from their side here, but we're going to actually have to end it on that note. And thanks to all of my guests for joining me today. Ahmed Alibrahim, Hakeem Al-Masmari, and here in the studio, Afsal Ashraf. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We love to hear your thoughts. You can get in touch with us on our program page. That is ALJAZEERA.com. You can post your comments at Facebook.com/Inside Story or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Rochelle Carey, and the entire team here, thanks for your time, and bye for now.
Saudi-led forces to inspect the ship. And witnesses in several cities say the Houthis are continuing to shell neighborhoods.
The Houthis are divided. There is a group of Houthi fighters that very much would like to accept the ceasefire and move along. But then there is another group that is probably under the influence of the Iranian government that is not necessarily happy with the terms of the ceasefire.
The UN Special Envoy to Yemen landed in the country on Tuesday night. He says the ceasefire must be unconditional and safe passage must be given so aid can reach Yemenis.
We came convinced that there is no solution except a political one. Yemen has no choice but to have all the different sides sit at the table to find a solution.
As the ceasefire begins in Yemen, Human Rights Watch is demanding Houthis stop recruiting child soldiers. The group accuses the Houthis of intensifying their efforts to get children to join their fight. Natasha Ghanem, Al Jazeera.
Well, Hashim Al-Habara is live in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. Hi there, Hashim. Is the ceasefire holding?
Well, basically, it's holding across most of the country, except for some sporadic clashes taking place in Adala and Taz. But in general, there is a ceasefire, which is so far been respected by most of the different feuding factions. Now, the Saudi army said that there's been some shells that landed in Saudi villages in Nazran al-Asir, but that the Saudi army is observing self-restraint so that this ceasefire holds and stays for a longer period. Sources close to the Houthis say that there's been some, they've heard Saudi-led coalition warplanes flying over some areas, but we couldn't get any confirmation of that from sources here in Riyadh.
Hashim Al-Habara there live from Riyadh with that update. Hashim, thank you. Now, Yemen is likely to be on the agenda as leaders from Gulf nations gather in the United States for a summit on regional security. US President Barack Obama has welcomed Saudi Arabian leaders to the White House ahead of that meeting. Now, Obama met Saudi Crown Prince and the Deputy Crown Prince in the Oval Office. The US President said the two nations are building on a strong relationship during a challenging time.
On a personal level, my work and the U.S. government's work with These two individuals and Crown Prince bin Nayef on counterterrorism issues has been absolutely critical not only to maintaining stability in the region, but also protecting the American people. And I want to thank them for their extraordinary support and hard work and coordination on our counterterrorism efforts.
Well, let's go live now to Alan Fisher in Washington, D.C. Hi there, Alan. We know some GCC leaders, of course, won't be there. Is that a snub to Barack Obama?
Well, certainly some people would try and portray it as the discontent among GCC members about American foreign policy in the region and their outreach to the Iranians, particularly over the nuclear deal. Of the 6 GCC countries, only 2 heads of state will be here. It's the Emir of Qatar and the Emir of Kuwait as well. So they will be here. But those that are attending aren't just minor figures. We're hearing that it's going to be the Saudi Crown Prince, their foreign minister, and his man who's in charge of the defense ministry. So these aren't insignificant figures. People who are involved in the day-to-day decisions that will affect a lot of what goes on in the GCC. And there is a lot to talk about at the moment as well, because not only do you have Iran and you have Yemen as well, but you also have the ongoing battle against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. So there's a lot to discuss. What will the GCC be looking for? They'll be looking for some security guarantees from the United States. The UAE, the United Arab Emirates, has already said they would like to see something in writing. That's unlikely, but they will get commitments that they will get access to more American weapons. Of course, the Americans can't go too far because legally they're obliged to make sure that Israel maintains a slight edge in any arms race in the Middle East. That's in American law, and so they have to do this. But it will mean that there will be more weapons flowing to the area, perhaps more military operations together. They were talking about cyber security as well. So there's a lot of ground to cover over the next 24 hours or so, both here at the White House, and there will be a formal dinner for the leaders later on this evening, and also on Thursday when all of them head to Camp David, when they're hoping that they will break off into groups and discuss something more substantive before we get what will be the final communique, the final statement from the group on what has been achieved at this mini-summit.
Alan Fisher there live from Washington, D.C. Alan, thank you. Still ahead here on Al Jazeera.
You could feel it off the tracks, and then we just rolled and rolled.
A train derails on one of the busiest rail corridors in the United States. And the lapse in concentration that apparently cost North Korea's defense minister his life.
Hello and welcome back. Well, as we look at the weather across southern China and Taiwan, we've got drier conditions for Taiwan as Typhoon Nul has cleared away, but at least it's meant that water restrictions in the country have been relaxed. But we've got some heavy rain across parts of sort of central and eastern China extending towards Shanghai, and that tends to intensify as we move through to Friday. Scattered showers across Indo-China with some really big downpours expected still across parts of Bangladesh and the eastern states of India. Significant storms still going on here. Across South Asia as a whole, it's beginning to look quite lively ahead of the monsoon season. Certainly across southern areas, we've got some heavy rain here. We've had some heavy rain being reported in Sri Lanka. Looking at the forecast, 1 or 2 showers for eastern parts of Nepal coming in the form of thunderstorms. But really across much of the region it's fine. It's still pretty hot temperatures, 38 degrees there in New Delhi. Here in the Arabian Peninsula, no great train change for the time being. Very hot temperatures in excess of 40 degrees in many areas. Still a chance of 1 or 2 showers in parts of Yemen. So Sana'a, you could see the odd downpour. Across the Levant, eastern areas largely dry and fine. Unsettled conditions though around the eastern part of the Mediterranean, but sunshine in Beirut with highs here of 20 degrees.
We all have stories to tell, memories and moments in time. Some speak of pain and loss, but the human spirit prevails, strengthened by the bonds that tie. These are the stories that endure. Witness at this time on Al Jazeera.
A reminder now of the top stories here on Al Jazeera. Thousands of people have been celebrating in Burundi's capital after an army general announced the president had been dismissed. Pierre Nkurunziza says he's returning to Burundi after holding talks in Tanzania, but the general says he won't be allowed back in as the airport and borders have been closed. After weeks of bombing, a sense of normality has returned to Yemen's capital as a 5-day truce proposed by Saudi Arabia appears to be holding, but there have been reports of violations of the truce in some areas. And Yemen is likely to be on the agenda during talks between President Obama and the Saudi Crown Prince in Washington, D.C. The Saudi King Salman declined an invitation to attend a summit of Gulf nations to discuss regional security. Now, the Iraqi military says the deputy leader of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant has been killed. Abdullah al-Afri is reported to have died in a coalition airstrike near Tal Afar, that's west of Mosul. Al-Afri was apparently holding a meeting with other ISIL leaders at the time of the strike. Zaina Hodder has more now from Baghdad.
Abu Ala al-Afri is believed to be the second in command in the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant organization. They call him a stand-in leader. The leader of ISIL, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, is believed to have been wounded a few weeks ago. There have been a lot of reports that Baghdadi has become
war started, this is the time to get the humanitarian, assets pushed to Yemen. By doing this, you are actually risking all what you've done in the past 7 weeks to have these two groups to regroup and to rearrange themselves to start changing plans. I'm sure they're getting their plans from a regional country that's feeding them that, and Saudi Arabia have all this in plan that if anything would interrupt with the big picture of Operation Decisive, I think the ceasefire is going to be interrupted by the coalition.
Okay. Also, what he's speaking to is parties taking advantage of what is supposed to be a true ceasefire. Speak about that risk.
Well, that's a very high risk. Parties will take advantage of these things. They can't but not take advantage. The Houthis are on the back foot because of the coalition's airstrikes. If they get an opportunity, they may well be reorganizing their forces. They may well be moving up their logistics. They have to, otherwise they will not survive. So you will get this. The problem, of course, is if the Saudis or the coalition see movements and exploitation, what they interpret as exploitation of the ceasefire, and interrupt it, as has been suggested, then what you will have is no humanitarian aid. And as we've already heard, even the 5 days, total uninterrupted ceasefire, will not really be anywhere near adequate to deal with the humanitarian crisis. And so this discourse about the ceasefire and the debate between the two parties is actually taking the focus away from the main point, and that is what is happening to the ordinary people in Yemen, the humanitarian aspects, and how this is being played out throughout the region in terms of what people think about the suffering of ordinary people and the way their governments are dealing with this situation.
In fact, I have some numbers to put a little bit of perspective on exactly what you were saying about how bad the humanitarian crisis is in Yemen. Yemen has been under an air and naval blockade for weeks now, deepening a humanitarian crisis that started before the conflict. The UN says at least 828 civilians have been killed since the fighting intensified in March, though that figure may actually be higher. Around 300,000 people have been displaced in that same period. The blockade has stopped a lot of supplies from coming in, which has led to severe shortages of food and fuel. Many hospitals have been badly damaged or destroyed, and civilians in the worst hit areas have little or no access to health care. Schools, they have been closed down, and aid groups are now worried about an increasing number of children who are being used as soldiers. That is clearly a dire situation, and this is something that Hakeem actually brought up right away. Hakeem, you say that 5 days is not nearly enough to begin to get a handle on this situation. Just how bad is it?
Oh, it's tremendously bad. I'll give you an example. 2 days ago, there were 180 airstrikes in Sana'a, and 90 people were killed, all civilians. Most of them did not die because of the airstrikes. They died because they were not able to get medical attention. Why? Number one, because hospitals are closed, because there's no electricity to operate the hospitals because of blackouts in Yemen that have been ongoing for 38 straight days. Number two, even if you had electricity, there's no petrol for cars or emergency trucks to operate and take the injured to the hospital. So it's very hard to understand. Only if you're on the ground. 5 days is peanuts compared to what Yemen really needs. The aid will not reach the families only at day 5. The petrol will not be allowed to enter the gas stations only in day 3. The food aid as well. The Iranian food aid that is coming is being stopped by the Saudis for search reasons. Right now, Yemen is witnessing the most worrying hunger crisis in its history, and probably the biggest in the region in many years. And this 5-day ceasefire, hopefully it lasts, because the goal of lasting is not for it to last only, it's for it to be extended, or else it's useless. Yes, Saudi has a point that 7 weeks of war could go to waste if they allow Houthis to regroup. But again, these I talked to a number of top Houthi leaders, and they said that they're very committed to the ceasefire and will only react or fight if they are attacked. So, what's happening in some provinces where there are attacks here and there and clashes, this is because of the lack of communication between the leadership and the fighters on the ground, and this is also involved in the humanitarian crisis. So very fragile. Not anything that happens is considered clashes or war. This is a different kind of ceasefire that the world or both sides must understand that it's not your normal ceasefire. Last night at 11 o'clock.
Okay, Hakeem, I can tell that Ahmed wants to get in on some of what you're saying. Go right ahead.
Yeah. I mean, what I want to say is there's no free or free ride on a war. Nobody wants to get into war. Definitely there's going to be casualty. There's going to be a growing number. Of course, let's say a big percentage of the casualties or the people who basically got killed, they are Houthis. These are the right people that Saudi Arabia and the coalition is targeting. Unfortunately, we see first-class world countries like the United States when they went to the invasion in Iraq. It wasn't like no Iraqis has been, no civilian has been dead, no hospitals has been interrupted, no people couldn't find medicine. You would expect that in Yemen, especially those ruthless Houthis and the regime of Ali Abdullah Saleh. They actually put people in hospital. They had weapons in schools. Actually, they had weapons in mosques. So you should anticipate there's going to be casualties.
Let's be clear that those are your accusations. Let's be clear.
There is whatever. This is not an accusation. This is a fact. This is some things. You are not fighting a legitimate army. You are fighting a militia. This is an advanced militia from different regional part, of the country, and you can see the replicas, whether in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon. This is the same style of fighting. This is the same doctrine, ideology. On a ceasefire time, you know, they don't even respect it. They move into towns, they start arresting people, they start interrupting the ceasefire. What do you expect from the coalition? Should I just back off on the 7 weeks, you know, I've been doing, and I'm trying to progress, and I'm trying to bring the government and the president of Yemen to the region, or should I just wait? And even if 5 days is a lot, and putting more time to it, it might threaten the whole operation of Operation Decisive.
Okay, I'd like to bring in now Asel. So obviously, when you're talking about a war, each side thinks that the other side is the one who is in the wrong. Let's talk about a solution. Let's talk about bringing this to some sort of conclusion. Who should lead the way?
Well, the only people in a position to really lead the way are those people who have the monopoly of power. And at the moment, it's the coalition that has the monopoly of power. And so they have to engage, perhaps through intermediaries, whether they're the UN, international intermediaries, or it could be regional intermediaries, such as perhaps a country such as Oman, for example, has been mooted as a possible. But I think one point I'd like to just come back on, which is relevant to the solution, is listening to Ahmed. I don't want to suggest whether what he's saying is right or wrong. It's immaterial. But his argument is almost exactly the same as the argument used by the Israeli governments over Palestine. And this is a very serious point. We have a blockade, we have innocents suffering, we have a suggestion that the country, in the case of Palestine, is being ruled by an irregular army. We've got the same thing in Yemen. We've got the fact that casualties are inevitable consequences of operations, etc., etc. The rhetoric is exactly the same as that used by the Israelis. The scenario is very similar. And that, I think, is a very important thing. It'll be very dangerous if the publics of the region interpret this in the same way, for example, as they've interpreted Israeli military action in Palestine.
So how important is rhetoric when you're fighting a war? How important are the optics of it when you're fighting a war?
They're very important. And the big problem is that state institutions and state powers of all countries, Western and regional, are forgetting one thing, that nowadays, the modern world, people have a say. People have a vote. And what happens to people and how they interpret the information that they're seeing is the most critical thing. And I think this is where the coalition perhaps ought to just take stock of how its case is being presented. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, it's how it's being presented is going to really determine success or failure on the streets.
Ahmed, what case are the Saudis presenting? What is the end game?
Listen, first of all, I agree with my friend. We need a big first world country to come together with Saudi Arabia and start planning, what's the next game in Yemen and how we're going to exit Yemen. The thing is, comparing me or the tone of what I'm saying, it's close to what Israel is explaining into Gaza. You know what? Israel, at the end of the day, it's a Middle Eastern country. They do face challenges. Some of the challenges they face, we do face. And it doesn't mean that if we are common in one area, that means we are sold and we have the same doctrine that Israel does. So I'm just going to let this go. What Saudi Arabia wants. Saudi Arabia never, with all the policies and the leaders and the history of Saudi Arabia, they don't like to interrupt into war. Actually, we would like a good economy and a good living and relax, and that's it. And we do our travels in the summer. Going into war is the last option on the scale that the Saudi government
So what do the Saudis want in Yemen?
The Saudis want the legitimate government to come back to Yemen. They don't want any militia. We don't want another Hezbollah in Yemen. We don't want Qaeda in Yemen. We don't want ISIS in Yemen. We don't want any terrorists in Yemen. We fight terrorists so hard inside Saudi Arabia, and we're going to fight terrorism without any countries has any border, with Yemen. My dear, we have 2.6 million Yemenis living among us. We share the same food. We share the same belief. We share the same heritage. Those people, they they agree and they nod to what Saudi Arabia wants to give them in Yemen, what kind of freedom they want to have. Those people are living among us, and Saudi Arabia, in God's willing, they're going to do that. There is difficulties, yes.
Let me interrupt you for just a minute, because you're talking about the people, and that's what this is all about. That's what actually matters here. Hakeem, the longer this goes on, how does the fabric of Yemen change? How does this affect the people the longer that this goes on?
Saudi Arabia will be affected more than the people of Yemen. Let me give some facts, even though I do not want to talk about this because I'm not a Houthi. But Saudi Arabia, as of now, has failed to accomplish mission. The Houthis have entered many of the provinces in the south of Yemen, including Aden. They kicked out all the pro-Saudi fighters from Aden over the last couple of weeks. So there's no success on the ground. The Houthis are expanding. If this war does not come to an end, and this does not turn into a negotiation process where political factions agree and sit on a dialogue table, this war will not end up in Yemen. Its wings will spread to other regions. Then it will be more than hard to stop. And what we saw is nothing to what will happen. The idea is because people have no other option. They're desperate. The Houthis know that their fighters have no other option. They're losing ground and support in Yemen because of them doing nothing.
Let me speak to that point. The longer this goes on, is there a risk of this spreading?
There is a great risk of this spreading. This thing, if it's not controlled and brought to an end very quickly, one of the lessons we've learned in the last couple of decades about modern warfare is that no matter how brilliant your air power, and I'm a great advocate of air power, that's my specialization, no matter how brilliant your military forces, if you cannot solve the problems politically, then they go on. This is why Iraq still is an issue, and it's getting worse by the day. This is why Afghanistan has been one of the longest wars and hasn't been solved, and its problems are spilt over into Pakistan and elsewhere. The problems in Iraq are spilt over into Syria and elsewhere. And the big worry we have, I have, and I hope I'm wrong, is that Yemen is not destabilized to the extent that it becomes a failed state. This becomes an area of ungoverned space where extremism thrives. It's just basic fuel for extremism. And so unless the coalition can bring this thing to a solution politically,